So we've set up our camera, so now that we have a good perspective of what our player will see, we're going to play around with the actual Unity editor itself to rearrange some of our windows and make it easier for us to navigate. So a really cool thing about Unity is you can actually reorganize all of these different little tabs that you see to clean up our project and make it a little bit more efficient for us. So in fact, for example, with our game view, if I left click on it and I drag it, it actually snaps out of the view that we're in. And I can put this wherever I really want. So I can put this underneath the scene, and then we can actually resize these windows. Or if I left click and drag the game again, I can drag it down to the bottom where our project window was and put it down there. So that's kind of cool. We can rearrange things however we want. Luckily, in Unity, we can actually just do all of these things with some preset options. So on the top right, all the way past the inspector, in the corner, you can see this little button that says default. So in fact, if I left click on that, and since I move things around, if I click on the default button again, it'll reset my entire editor experience to be back to what we had in the very beginning. And then if I click on the default option again, there's other options. So there's a 2x3, which is kind of cool. There's a 4 split. So this is kind of useful, especially if you're doing like a 2D game or something like that. There's a tall layout. And so this one puts our scene view and our game view side by side, which is kind of useful. We have a much larger view of what is happening. So I actually kind of like the tall view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rearrange some things a little bit. So I'm going to make our inspector just a bit smaller. So you see these lines between the windows. You can actually mouse over them. It turns into this little drag icon. And then you can click and drag our inspector. So I'll make that a bit smaller. I'm actually going to make our hierarchy and our project column a little bit smaller too. So I'll click and drag. Now our project window is kind of messy now. So what I could do is all the way at the bottom right of our project window, there's this little slider at the bottom. So this actually makes our icons larger if I drag it to the right. If I drag it all the way to the left, it actually makes it smaller. So then I can like double click on these instead, and then it'll just create list views of what I can see. But I don't get those cool little previews of our little assets, unfortunately. And then it's still kind of it's still kind of narrow. If I had longer names, it'd be really hard to see. So in fact, I'm just going to turn this into one column entirely instead of having these two small columns. So in my project window, all the way on the right side, there's this tiny drop down. And if you're using a new version of Unity, you'll see 3 dots in a vertical line. So if I click on that, you can see there's a 2 column layout or there's a 1 column layout. So if I click on the 1 column, now it gets rid of my folder previews for what I can see inside my vehicles folder. So now instead, I just have to click on these little drop-down arrows, and then it shows me all of the different assets that I can use. Same thing with the obstacles. The nice thing too is it makes it a little bit easier if I collapse the vehicles folder, and then I can even collapse my course library. Now it like looks really clean, which is helpful. And then the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to left click and drag the game window, and I'm actually going to drag it to the bottom of our view, and it pops like that. Now, one thing that might happen is, for example, if you actually drag it out of a space where there's anywhere it could snap to, it'll actually pop out like this, which can be helpful sometimes, but not entirely ideal. So you can actually just click on that tab again, drag it back, and then snap it in place. And now if we make this a bit larger, cool. Now we have a really good view of our game and our scene at the same time. So this is what we as the creator see versus what our player will see when they play the game. And then if we want to actually save this all the way on the right side back to where we set our layouts, if you click on that, at the bottom of the options is actually a save layout. So if I click on save layout, I can rename. So I'll call this my layout. So now I have my layout saved to use whenever I want. So that's super handy. So what you're going to do is you're going to click on my layout, and you can select one of the different layouts that you think is cool. In this case, I went with the tall layout, and then I dragged out by clicking on the game tab and then dragging it down to the bottom, snapped it to the bottom of our scene view. So now we have both views together. I resized my inspector and my hierarchy just so there's more space. And then because our project window got a bit cluttered because it's pretty small down here, on the project window, all the way on the right side, you see this little drop down. If I click on that, there's an option to select one column layout. And so now all of our folders are just in these columns, and I can just expand them and collapse them